Have you ever trusted someone with your whole career, only to find out they were planning your downfall the entire time? I want you to imagine this. You walk into your office on a normal Monday morning, coffee in hand, smile on your face. You have worked for this company for 6 years. You have given up weekends, missed family dinners, and poured your heart into every single project. And then, in one meeting, in front of everyone you respect, your own boss stands up and says your name is attached to a failure that was never yours. That is exactly what happened to me. My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is what I went through and what I did about it. Because this is not just a story about a bad boss. This is a story about betrayal from someone I once called a mentor. A story about lies, manipulation, and a plan so quiet, so patient, that nobody saw it coming. Not even me. But here's the twist. The same person who tried to destroy my career ended up losing everything they built. And I am going to tell you exactly how it happened. Step by step. Moment by moment. Because if you are watching this right now, and someone at your job has ever made you feel small, unseen, or used, you need to hear this story to the very end. Stay with me. Because what starts as one woman's worst professional nightmare turns into one of the most satisfying stories of quiet, calculated justice you will ever hear. Let's go back to the beginning. Back to when I still believed that hard work was enough. Back to when I still trusted him. 3 years ago, I joined a mid-sized marketing firm as a project coordinator. It wasn't a glamorous job. Long hours, tight deadlines, clients who changed their minds every other day. But I loved it. I loved the chaos of turning an idea into something real. My boss, I'll call him Daniel, was the head of the department. When I first met him, he seemed like everything I wanted to become. Confident, sharp, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately take control of it. He had built his reputation over almost 15 years at the company, and everyone respected him, including me. In my first few months, Daniel took an interest in my work. He would stop by my desk, check on my progress, offer advice. He told me I had real potential, something no one had ever said to me at a job before. I remember going home that night feeling like I had finally found a place where my effort would be noticed. For the next year, I worked harder than I ever had in my life. I stayed late. I took on extra projects. I said yes to things I probably shouldn't have said yes to, all because I wanted to prove that his trust in me wasn't misplaced. And it paid off. Slowly, I started getting bigger responsibilities. I led my first client campaign. It succeeded beyond expectations. Then a second one. Then a third. Clients started asking for me by name. My coworkers began coming to me for guidance instead of going straight to Daniel. Looking back now, I think that is exactly when things started to change. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I did something right, and I did it too well. At the time, I didn't notice it. I was too busy working, too busy being grateful for the opportunities one thought Daniel was giving me. I didn't realize that somewhere along the way, gratitude had blinded me to something much darker, growing quietly in the background. Because success, when it grows too fast under the wrong person's watch, doesn't always bring celebration. Sometimes it brings jealousy. And jealousy, when left unchecked, can turn even the warmest mentor into your most dangerous enemy. I just didn't know it yet. The first sign was small. So small that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. We were in a team meeting, presenting results from a campaign I had led for almost 4 months. It was, without question, one of the best performing projects our department had produced that year. I had prepared slides. I had the numbers ready. I was proud, and I had every reason to be. But when the senior director asked who had led the project, Daniel answered before I could open my mouth. "We worked on this together," he said, smiling. It was a real team effort. It wasn't a lie exactly. He had approved the strategy. But he hadn't written a single line of the campaign, hadn't spoken to the client once, hadn't stayed late a single night working on it. I had done all of that. Alone. I told myself it didn't matter. Teams share credit. That's normal, right? I pushed the discomfort down and kept working. But then it happened again. And again. Every time a project succeeded, Daniel's name would somehow attach itself to the achievement. And every time something went wrong, even something outside my control, like a client changing requirements last minute, my name was the one that came up in the postmortem. I started noticing other things too. Meetings I wasn't invited to, even though they were about projects I was running. Emails where I was quietly left off the recipient list. Decisions made about my work without my input. then handed to me after the fact, as if I should just be thankful to be included at all. Still, I made excuses for him. He's busy. He's under pressure from upper management. Maybe I'm overreacting. That is the tricky thing about betrayal. It rarely announces itself. It doesn't burst through the door. It creeps in slowly, disguised as bad luck, miscommunication, or a busy schedule. By the time you realize what's really happening, you've already spent months convincing yourself it's nothing. I wish someone had told me back then. When your gut keeps whispering that something is wrong, listen to it. Because mine kept whispering, and I kept ignoring it. Until the day I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was a Thursday afternoon. I remember it clearly because I had just finished the biggest presentation of my career, a proposal for a client contract that could have doubled our department's revenue for the year. I had spent almost 2 months on it. Research, strategy, design, client calls at odd hours because of time zone differences. I gave it everything. The presentation went well. The client loved it. Daniel shook my hand afterward and told me, in front of 2 senior executives, this is exactly the kind of work that gets people promoted. I went home that night feeling like everything I had sacrificed was finally about to pay off. For the first time in months, I let myself believe that the recognition I had been chasing was finally within reach. 2 weeks later, I found out the promotion had gone to someone else. Not just any promotion. My promotion. The role I had been quietly working toward for over a year. The one Daniel himself had told me I was being considered for. It went to a newer employee who had been at the company less than 8 months. Someone with far less experience, far fewer results, and, as I would later discover, someone who had been having private dinners with Daniel outside of work. I was in shock. I asked for a meeting with Daniel to understand what had happened. He sat across from me, calm, composed, almost rehearsed, and told me that leadership felt I wasn't quite ready yet, that I needed to work on my communication style. That good things take time. I left that meeting feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my professional life. But the real blow came a month later. A major client project, one I had personally built from the ground up, hit a snag because of a scheduling issue on the client's side, something completely outside anyone's control. In the leadership meeting that followed, Daniel stood up and told the room that the delay was due to poor project management on the coordinator's end. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew exactly who he meant. That was the moment everything became clear. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't miscommunication. This was a pattern. Daniel had spent over a year quietly taking credit for my successes and quietly assigning blame for anything that went wrong, all while positioning someone else, someone he could control, someone who wouldn't threaten his position, for advancement. I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being erased. On purpose. By the very person I had trusted the most. And the worst part? I still had no proof. Just a gut feeling, a string of coincidences, and a growing, burning sense that something was deeply, deeply wrong. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my career. I started dreading Monday mornings. I would sit in my car in the parking lot before work, just breathing, trying to find the strength to walk through those doors. My confidence, the thing I had built brick by brick over 3 years, was crumbling. Coworkers started treating me differently too. Nothing dramatic, just small shifts. Fewer people stopping by my desk to chat. Fewer invitations to lunch. I later learned that Daniel had been quietly telling select people that I was difficult to work with and not a team player. Words designed to plant doubt without ever being loud enough to challenge directly. I remember calling my sister one night, sitting on my kitchen floor, and just breaking down. I told her I felt like I was losing my mind. That maybe I really was the problem. Maybe I had imagined all of it. She said something to me that I will never forget. She said, "The fact that you're questioning your own reality this much means someone worked very hard to make you doubt yourself." That sentence stayed with me for weeks. I started documenting everything after that. Not out of some grand plan for revenge. At that point, I just wanted to protect my own sanity. I began saving emails, screenshotting messages, writing down dates and details of meetings, conversations, and decisions. Small things, innocent things on their own. But together, they were starting to form a pattern I could no longer deny. Meanwhile, my work performance, ironically, started to genuinely suffer. Not because I had become careless, but because the constant stress of walking on eggshells, of never knowing when the next quiet blow would land, was exhausting me in ways I hadn't experienced before. And that, I would later understand, was exactly what Daniel needed. Because a person who is anxious, self-doubting, and exhausted rarely fights back. They just try to survive. I nearly quit. I had my resignation letter halfway written more than once. Some nights, walking away seemed like the only way to protect what little was left of my confidence. But something kept stopping me. A small, stubborn voice that refused to let him win quietly. A voice that said, if I walk away now, he gets to keep telling this story his way. And I deserve the chance to tell the truth. So instead of quitting, I made a different decision. A quiet one. One that would change everything. I decided I was done being afraid. I was going to find out exactly what was happening. And I was going to be ready when the moment came to prove it. There is a specific moment I can point to as the beginning of my fight back. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big speech, no confrontation in the hallway. It happened quietly, at my kitchen table, at 11 o'clock at night, staring at a folder full of screenshots and emails. I realized something important that night. Daniel had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated me. He assumed I would eventually get discouraged and leave on my own. He assumed I would blame myself instead of questioning him. He assumed I was too afraid, too tired, too invested in keeping the peace to ever push back. He was wrong. I stopped seeing myself as a victim in that story and started seeing myself as someone gathering evidence. That shift in mindset changed everything. Instead of spiraling every time something unfair happened, I started calmly asking myself one question. How can I document this? I began keeping a private, detailed record, dates, times, exact quotes from meetings, copies of emails that showed who had actually done the work on each project versus who had claimed credit. I saved performance reviews that contradicted what Daniel was privately telling others about me. I even kept records of the times he had taken credit for my ideas in meetings where other witnesses were present. I also started being smarter about protecting myself in real time. When Daniel gave me verbal instructions that later got misremembered in his version of events, I began following up with a simple email, just confirming what we discussed. Please let me know if I've misunderstood anything. It felt small, almost pointless, but it created a paper trail that couldn't be twisted later. I reached out, carefully, to a couple of trusted colleagues, people I had worked closely with over the years, people I believed had integrity. I didn't ask them to take sides. I simply asked if they had noticed anything unusual. To my surprise, two of them admitted they had. One even shared an email that backed up something I had suspected for months. Proof that Daniel had rewritten a project summary to shift blame onto me after a client complaint that was actually caused by a decision he had made himself. Piece by piece, the picture was forming. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt focused. I want to pause here and say something important. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. I wasn't trying to destroy Daniel's life. I simply wanted the truth to be known. I wanted to reclaim the reputation I had worked so hard to build. And deep down, I wanted him to face the consequences of choices he had made, believing no one would ever notice. Little did he know, someone already had. Gathering proof was one thing. Knowing what to do with it was another. I understood that if I walked into HR with vague complaints and hurt feelings, it would go nowhere. Daniel was well liked by leadership, and complaints without solid evidence often get dismissed as personality conflicts. I needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be explained away with his usual calm confidence and rehearsed answers. So I built a timeline, a clear, chronological record showing exactly how each successful project connected back to my actual work. Emails, drafts, client communications, internal messages, compared against Daniel's public statements taking credit for those same projects. Then, separately, I built a second timeline showing every instance where problems outside my control had been quietly blamed on me, with evidence proving the real cause. I organized everything clearly, without emotional language, without accusations, just facts, dates, and documentation. I knew that the moment this became personal or emotional on paper, it would be easy to dismiss. Around this time, something happened that I hadn't planned for, but that ended up being exactly what I needed. A new client project began facing serious delays, a project Daniel was personally overseeing, one he had taken direct control of after removing me from a leadership role on it months earlier. As the deadline slipped and the client grew frustrated, I watched him scramble to find someone to blame, the same way he always had. Except this time, I was ready. When leadership called a meeting to understand what had gone wrong, I didn't panic. I didn't get defensive. I simply asked, calmly, if I could share some documentation that might help clarify the full picture. The room went quiet. I laid out the timeline. Clearly, calmly, without raising my voice, without pointing fingers dramatically, just facts, dates, and evidence, presented one after another. Emails showing who had actually built the strategies behind our department's biggest wins. Messages showing decisions Daniel had made that directly caused the current project's delays. And the internal note where he had rewritten the narrative of an earlier failure to place the blame on me. I watched his face change in real time. The calm, confident expression he always wore began to crack. For the first time in over a year, he was the one struggling to find the right words. Silence is a powerful thing. And in that meeting room, the silence after I finished speaking felt louder than anything I had ever experienced. The senior director, a woman I deeply respected, looked through the documents slowly. She asked a few clarifying questions, sharp, direct ones. I answered each of them honestly, without exaggeration. I didn't need to exaggerate. The truth, laid out clearly, was powerful enough on its own. Daniel tried to respond. He started with his usual composed tone, the one that had worked on so many people for so many years. But this time, it didn't land the same way. Because for every explanation he offered, there was a document that told a different story, and everyone in that room could see it. At one point, he tried to shift the conversation, saying that I was being overly sensitive and reading too much into normal workplace dynamics. But one of the colleagues I had spoken with earlier, the one who had shared that email with me, spoke up on their own, confirming that they had witnessed similar behavior firsthand. That was the moment the room shifted completely. I want to be clear about something. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't demand an apology in front of everyone. I simply told the truth, backed it up with facts, and let the evidence speak for itself. Sometimes, the most powerful form of justice isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and undeniable. The meeting ended without any dramatic announcement. No one was removed on the spot. Leadership said they needed time to review everything properly, to speak with additional team members, and to look deeper into the projects in question. Walking out of that room, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted, emotionally drained from carrying that weight for so long. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something else too, a quiet sense of relief. For the first time in over a year, I had told my truth, in full, with nothing held back. And it was out there now. It could no longer be buried or rewritten. Whatever happened next was no longer something Daniel could fully control. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of the end for him. The following weeks moved slowly, but they moved in a direction I hadn't dared to hope for. Leadership launched a proper internal review. They interviewed team members individually. They pulled records, compared timelines, and cross-checked the documentation I had provided against company files. More people, it turned out, had similar stories, smaller incidents they had brushed off individually, but that, together, painted a clear and consistent picture. One by one, the truth that Daniel had spent years carefully hiding began to surface. It turned out this wasn't the first time he had done something like this. There had been at least one other employee, years before me, who had quietly left the company under strange circumstances, someone who, I later learned, had also seen their achievements mysteriously credited to Daniel before they eventually gave up and moved on. I felt a strange mix of validation and sadness hearing that. Validation, because it confirmed I hadn't been imagining things. Sadness, because it meant someone else had gone through this before me, alone, without anyone to believe them. Eventually, leadership made their decision. Daniel was removed from his position, not through some dramatic public firing, but through a quiet, formal process, the kind of ending that fit the pattern of his own behavior. The confident, composed leader who had spent years subtly taking credit and shifting blame walked out of that building for the last time with far less fanfare than he had probably imagined for himself. As for me, I was offered the exact promotion that had quietly slipped away months earlier. Not out of pity, not as some symbolic gesture, but because, when the truth finally came to light, it was undeniable who had actually been doing the work all along. I won't pretend the victory erased everything I had gone through. The self-doubt, the sleepless nights, the months of feeling small and unseen. Those don't disappear overnight just because justice eventually arrives. But something did shift permanently inside me. I stopped being afraid to trust my own instincts. I stopped assuming that quiet, calm confidence in someone else automatically meant honesty. And I learned, in the hardest way possible, the true value of documentation, patience, and quiet persistence. Looking back now, I think about how easily this story could have ended differently. If I had quit that night I sat crying on my kitchen floor, Daniel's version of events would have become the only version anyone remembered. If I had let my self-doubt win, if I had convinced myself I was overreacting one time too many, the truth might never have come out at all. What saved me wasn't anger. It wasn't even courage, not in the beginning. It was simply refusing to let someone else quietly rewrite my reality without a fight. If there is one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this. When your instincts tell you something is wrong, don't dismiss them just because the person causing harm seems confident, respected, or well-liked. Manipulation doesn't always look loud or obvious. Sometimes it looks calm, polished, and reasonable, right up until the moment the truth finally breaks through. And if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, being quietly overlooked, blamed for things beyond your control, or slowly erased from your own achievements, remember this. Document everything. Stay calm. Don't let anyone convince you that standing up for yourself makes you difficult, or dramatic, or ungrateful. Truth takes time, but it rarely stays buried forever. Daniel spent years building a reputation on other people's work and other people's silence. In the end, it was that same quiet persistence, the very thing he underestimated in me, that brought everything crashing down around him. I am not sharing this story for sympathy. I'm sharing it because somewhere out there, someone else is sitting exactly where I once sat, doubting themselves, exhausted, wondering if they're imagining the unfairness happening around them. You're not imagining it, and you are not powerless. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own strength or your own story, let me know in the comments. And if you believe someone in your life needs to hear this today, share it with them. Because sometimes the quietest kind of justice is the most powerful kind of all. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.